Sign it, Maya. Take the 10 grand and go quietly before I leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back. Jamal laughed, the cruel sound cutting through the low, elegant hum of the upscale Atlanta steakhouse. He slid the thick stack of divorce papers across our candlelit table, pushing them right over the spot where my 10th anniversary gift should have been sitting, just 2 tables away. His family watched the spectacle unfold like they had front row tickets to a theater production. My white sister-in-law Chloe caught my eye and deliberately raised her champagne glass in a mocking little toast. Her lips curled into a satisfied smirk. They all thought I was just a struggling delivery driver, a woman who had finally worn out her welcome and was about to be thrown out onto the streets of the city with absolutely nothing to my name. They had no idea that while Jamal was busy hiding his modest corporate bonuses and planning this vicious ambush, I had just quietly finalized the sale of my medical logistics firm. I smiled, picked up the silver pen, and signed my name on the dotted line. Little did Jamal know, with that one arrogant move, he had just signed away his right to a $45 million empire. I am Maya, 35 years old, and my journey from being the family punchline to becoming a multi-million-dollar CEO is a story of ultimate vindication. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had someone mistake your silence for weakness. The restaurant was one of those highly exclusive spots in Buckhead where the lighting is always perfectly dim and the steaks cost more than a monthly car payment. I had spent hours getting ready, wearing a simple but elegant black dress, genuinely believing that reaching 10 years of marriage was a milestone we were finally going to celebrate properly. We had struggled through our 20s, or at least I thought we had been struggling together, building a foundation for our future. When I first walked through the glass doors and the hostess led me to our table, my heart immediately sank. Jamal was already seated, wearing his impeccably tailored navy suit, looking every inch the corporate finance director he was so incredibly proud of being. But he was not looking at me with love or nostalgia. He was looking at me with pure, unfiltered disdain. And then I noticed them. Sitting just a few feet away in a semi-private leather booth were his mother Vivian, his older brother Terrence, and Terrence's wife Chloe. They were not eating. They were just watching us, waiting for the show to begin. I am tired of carrying your dead weight, Maya. Jamal spoke at a normal volume, not even attempting to lower his voice. He wanted his family to hear. He wanted the surrounding tables to hear. 10 years. 10 years I have been funding your little box moving hustle while you come home smelling like diesel fuel and cardboard. I looked down at my hands resting on my lap. They were perfectly manicured now, but for the first 5 years of our marriage, they had been calloused, bruised, and rough. I did not just move boxes. I had built a highly specialized medical supply transport company from absolutely nothing. I started with one single-used refrigerated van, driving blood samples and organ donations between Atlanta hospitals at 3 in the morning, while Jamal slept comfortably in our bed. I worked 80-hour weeks, navigating complex state health regulations, securing massive commercial contracts, and quietly building a logistics network that eventually became the irreplaceable backbone of the state's largest hospital system. But to Jamal, I was just playing at being a business owner. He measured success by corner offices, designer labels, and corporate titles. He was a finance director, a man who moved numbers on a spreadsheet and genuinely thought he ruled the world. He constantly belittled my long hours, complaining that I was embarrassing him in front of his polished corporate friends because I chose to wear work boots instead of stilettos during the day. You are 35. Jamal continued, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms with a look of supreme superiority. And you are still playing delivery driver. I am moving up to vice president next quarter. I am stepping into a new tax bracket. I cannot have a wife who looks like she belongs on a loading dock, holding me back from my potential. I glanced over at his family's table. Chloe leaned over and whispered something behind her hand to Vivian, and the two of them let out a quiet, synchronized laugh. Chloe had never liked me. Coming from a wealthy family herself, from the day Terrence brought her into our circle, she had made it her personal mission to establish a social hierarchy. In her mind, she was the sophisticated, cultured wife, and I was the blue-collar burden dragging down the family name, Vivian, who worshipped any kind of superficial status immediately favored Chloe and joined in on treating me like the hired help. Are you even listening to me? Jamal snapped, tapping his manicured finger sharply against the divorce papers. I am cutting you loose, Maya. It is over. I took a slow, deep breath, keeping my expression entirely neutral. On our anniversary, Jamal, you brought your mother and your sister-in-law to a steakhouse to watch you hand me divorce papers on our 10th anniversary. They are here to support me, he said smoothly, adjusting his expensive silk tie. Because breaking away from a financial parasite is a cause for celebration. The sheer audacity of his words almost made me laugh out loud. A financial parasite. For the last 3 years, as my company scaled massively across the Southeast, I had intentionally stopped pulling a traditional salary. I chose to live modestly and reinvest every single penny back into the business infrastructure to prepare for a massive corporate buyout. To Jamal, my modest personal checking account was concrete proof that I was failing at life. He had absolutely no idea about the corporate accounts, the lucrative stock options, or the intense, highly confidential negotiations I had been having with Horizon Health for the past 8 months. He reached into the breast pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black debit card. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a soft clatter against the white linen tablecloth, right next to the legal documents that would end our marriage. What is this? I asked, looking from the small piece of plastic to his arrogant face. That is a charity severance package, Jamal said, leaning forward with a cruel, calculating smile. There is exactly $10,000 on that card. I drained our joint checking account this morning and moved the funds to a secure private account that you cannot touch. My lawyer advised me to give you a little something to keep you off the streets until the ink dries on the divorce decree. My heart beat a steady, remarkably calm rhythm. He had drained the joint account, the account that held maybe $40,000 of his annual corporate bonuses. He actually thought he was leaving me destitute and desperate. You emptied our joint account without telling me, I stated, simply giving him the space to dig his hole just a little bit deeper. It was my money, Maya, he scoffed, rolling his eyes. Let us be real for a second. You have not contributed a single dime to our actual savings in years. Your little medical courier business barely breaks even on a good month. I am not going to let you bleed me dry in divorce court just because your street hustle never paid off. My money is my money and I am protecting it. From the corner of my eye, I saw Terrence give Jamal a subtle, encouraging nod. The whole family was in on this. They had planned this elaborate ambush together, coordinating the timing and location to maximize my humiliation. They wanted to break me down in public so I would be too shocked and embarrassed to fight back. And the condo, I asked, my voice remaining completely steady and soft. I suppose you have a plan for that too. Jamal's smile widened, showing his perfect teeth. You are damn right I do. I want you packed and out by Sunday evening. You can take your personal clothes and whatever cheap furniture you bought when we first got married. Leave everything else. I paid for the good stuff, so it stays with me. You can use that 10 grand to find yourself a nice little apartment somewhere outside the perimeter. Somewhere much more your speed. He pushed the silver pen closer to my hand. Sign the acknowledgement of service, Maya. Do not make this harder than it has to be. If you try to fight me on this, I will drag your failing business through a public audit, expose how worthless it is, and make you pay all my legal fees. Take the money and walk away with whatever dignity you have left. This was the exact moment he expected me to break. He expected me to cry, to beg for a second chance, to cause a massive scene that would confirm every terrible stereotype he and his family had ever constructed about me being an emotional, unstable burden. He wanted to feel powerful. He wanted to watch me crumble. I looked at the silver pen, then at the thick stack of divorce papers, and finally at the debit card sitting on the table. $10,000. A pathetic buyout offer for a decade of my life, presented by a man who was so blinded by his own towering ego that he never bothered to actually look at the financial paperwork he had signed over the years. I reached out and picked up the debit card. I slipped it casually into my purse, a bespoke designer bag that Jamal had frequently mocked as a cheap mall knockoff because he could not recognize quiet luxury if it hit him directly in the face. Then I picked up the pen. I did not hesitate for a single second. I flipped directly to the back page of the legal document and signed my name with a smooth, practiced stroke. I carefully capped the pen and set it down precisely parallel to the edge of the paper. Jamal blinked clearly, thrown off balance by how remarkably easy that was. He opened his mouth to speak, likely to deliver another rehearsed cutting insult, but I stood up from the table before he could get the words out. I smoothed down the front of my dress, picked up my purse, and looked down at him. "Keep the condo." "Jamal," I said softly, my voice carrying just enough for his eavesdropping family to hear the absolute chilling calm in my tone. I looked over at Chloe, who had lowered her champagne glass and was staring at me with a confused, tight-lipped frown. I looked at Vivian, whose aggressively smug expression was beginning to falter under my steady, unbothered gaze. And finally, I looked back down at the man I had spent 10 years loving, supporting, and eventually outgrowing completely. "Take the furniture." I continued, leaning in just a fraction so he could hear every syllable. "Take the joint account. Take your mother and your brother and your sister-in-law and celebrate your brilliant financial maneuvering tonight." Jamal's brow furrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. "What is that supposed to mean?" I gave him a smile that was entirely genuine, a smile built on $45 million of absolute untouchable freedom. "It means you should check your email in the morning," I whispered, stepping back from the table. "You might want to see who actually holds the deed to that condo before you start changing the locks on me." Without waiting for his response, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my heels clicking a steady, powerful rhythm against the polished hardwood floor. The crisp Atlanta air hit my face as I stepped outside into the night, and for the first time in 10 long years, I took a deep breath that was entirely my own. The anniversary ambush was over, but the real war had just begun, and I was holding all the ammunition. The morning light barely crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our downtown Atlanta condo when the electronic lock chimed. It was barely 7 in the morning. Jamal had promised me until Sunday evening, but patience was never his strong suit when he had an audience to impress. The heavy oak door swung open, and in walked my soon-to-be ex-husband, flanked by his entire personal cheering section. His mother Vivian marched in first, carrying a stack of flattened cardboard boxes like she was leading a crusade. Right behind her was Jamal's older brother Terrence, and trailing them both was Terrence's wife Chloe, clutching an oversized iced coffee and looking around my living room as if she were inspecting a foreclosed property. I was already awake, dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a plain gray sweater, standing in the kitchen with a mug of black coffee. I watched them invade my space. This was classic Jamal. He could never simply win a battle. He had to completely obliterate his opponent, and he always needed his family there to validate his cruelty. Over the past decade, Vivian had made it her personal mission to remind me that Jamal was the prize. She was a woman who valued appearances above all else, wearing her pristine church hats and judging anyone who did not fit into her narrow definition of black excellence. To her, a corporate finance director was the pinnacle of success. A daughter-in-law who came home with grease under her fingernails from fixing the refrigeration unit on a transport van was a stain on their family name. "Look at her, still standing around doing nothing," Vivian announced to the room, dropping the cardboard boxes onto the marble kitchen island with a loud thwack. "Jamal told you to be out this weekend, Maya. We decided to expedite the process. A successful man cannot have negative energy lingering in his sanctuary." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Good morning to you too, Vivian." Chloe stepped forward, her blonde hair perfectly blown out, wearing a tailored trench coat that cost more than my first delivery van. She reached into her massive tote bag and pulled out two slightly scuffed designer purses, tossing them carelessly onto the counter next to Vivian's boxes. "I brought you these," Maya Chloe said, her voice dripping with that sickeningly sweet Southern belle condescension she loved to use on me. "Since you are going to be back on the job market, you will need to look presentable for interviews. You cannot exactly walk into a respectable corporate office carrying that canvas backpack you always lug around. It is the least I could do to help you transition back into the real world." Terrence snorted from the living room, where he was already testing the firmness of the imported Italian leather sofa. "She does not need designer bags for warehouse interviews, Chloe. Let us just get her packed up so my brother can finally breathe some unpolluted air." Jamal stood by the front door, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, soaking in their insults like sunshine. He looked incredibly proud of himself. "You heard them, Maya," he said, checking his heavy gold watch. "I have a tea time at the country club at noon. Pack your clothes and whatever cheap knickknacks you brought into this marriage. Leave the furniture, the electronics, and the art. I paid for the good stuff to maintain the lifestyle I earned. You can take your little business ledgers and get out." I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I simply turned around, walked into the master bedroom, and began taking my clothes off the hangers. I packed methodically, folding simple blouses, sturdy work jeans, and modest blazers into a single rolling suitcase. I left the expensive jewelry Jamal had bought me for public appearances sitting right on the vanity. I left the silk sheets and the luxury throw pillows. I did not want anything that tied me to the false reality he had constructed. While I packed, their voices drifted down the hallway. Vivian was loudly praising Jamal for finally dropping his underachieving wife. She went on a long rant about how much potential he had wasted trying to carry my dead weight. Chloe chimed in, excitedly discussing which high society women she could set Jamal up with now that he was a free man. They treated me like a squatter who had overstayed her welcome, a pest they were finally exterminating from their pristine corporate bloodline. When I emerged from the bedroom 10 minutes later, pulling my single suitcase, the four of them were standing in the living room watching me with expressions of pure triumph. I paused by the hallway closet, opened it, and pulled out one final item. It was a heavy fireproof metal lockbox, small enough to tuck under my arm. It was battered and plain, entirely unremarkable to anyone looking at it. "Is that it?" Jamal asked, raising an eyebrow at my meager belongings. "Just the suitcase and your little secret box?" "That is it," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly even. "You keep the rest, Jamal. Every single piece of furniture in this condo. I do not want it." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Generous of you, Maya, especially since you could not afford to ship that couch across town anyway. Leave the spare keys on the counter. I am having the building management deactivate your fob by lunchtime." I pulled my keys from my pocket, unhooked the silver electronic fob, and set it gently on the marble island, next to Chloe's discarded out-of-season handbags. "Enjoy the condo," I said. I walked out the front door, leaving them to revel in their imaginary victory. The elevator ride down to the parking garage was silent and peaceful. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my reliable 5-year-old sedan, placed the heavy lockbox on the passenger seat, and drove out into the bustling Atlanta morning. I did not go far. I drove about 6 blocks down Peachtree Street and pulled over into a quiet commercial parking lot overlooking the downtown skyline. I put the car in park, turned off the engine, and let the quiet wash over me. Then I reached over and popped the latches on the metal lockbox. Inside, nestled among neat stacks of corporate filings and tax documents, were two very specific pieces of paper that Jamal and his family were completely oblivious to. I pulled out the first document. It was the original warranty deed to the luxury downtown condo I had just walked out of. The deed did not have Jamal's name on it. It did not have my personal name on it either. It was owned outright, free and clear, by Apex Medical Logistics LLC, my company. Jamal had been paying the monthly HOA fees and utilities from his corporate salary, convinced he was the master of the castle, completely unaware that his wife's business actually owned the walls surrounding him. Then I pulled out the second document. It was a heavily documented, legally binding post-nuptial agreement signed and notarized exactly 3 years ago. Looking at his sprawling signature on the final page brought a genuine smile to my face. 3 years ago, when I took out a massive commercial loan to expand my fleet of refrigerated medical transport trucks, Jamal had panicked. I was terrified that my little box-moving hustle was going to default and that creditors would come after his precious corporate bonuses and his pristine credit score. He had his lawyer draft this ironclad post-nuptial waiver, explicitly stating that he was absolving himself of any and all liabilities, debts, and responsibilities tied to my business entities. He had bullied me into signing it, calling me reckless and foolish. In his arrogant haste to protect himself from my potential failure, he had demanded a total legal separation of our business assets. He locked himself entirely out of my company, cementing the fact that my business belonged 100% to me. He had unknowingly shielded himself not from my debt, but from my monumental life-changing profits. I sat in my modest sedan, looking at the skyline, holding the very documents that would soon turn his arrogant laughter to ash. I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a deep professional voice answered. Elias speaking. Elias, I said, my voice crisp and commanding a tone Jamal had never bothered to listen to. Jamal just initiated the divorce. He served me the papers last night and triggered the separation of assets clause. He practically pushed me out the door this morning. There was a brief pause on the line, followed by the sound of Elias chuckling softly. Well then, I assume he is feeling quite proud of himself. I thinks I am homeless and broke, I replied, running a manicured finger over the deed to the condo. He told me to take my $10,000 charity severance and go. He brought his whole family to witness the eviction. Excellent, Elias said, his tone shifting into pure legal strategy. If the separation of assets clause is triggered, and we have his signed waiver from 3 years ago, affirming his absolute disinterest in your corporate entities, then we are completely clear. That is exactly what I was thinking, I said, looking out at the glittering glass buildings of the medical district in the distance. It is time to finalize the Horizon Health acquisition, sign the final release forms today, let him dig his own grave. I drove away from that parking lot, leaving my old life completely behind me. I did not head toward the city outskirts or look for a cheap weekly motel like Jamal and his family so gleefully imagined. Instead, I drove straight to the heart of Midtown Atlanta and pulled into the secure underground garage of a sleek glass tower. The valet greeted me by name and took my keys. I rode the private elevator up to the penthouse suite. The doors opened directly into a sprawling, sun-drenched apartment with panoramic views of the city. The countertops were pristine white quartz. The furniture was modern and immaculate. This luxury suite did not cost me a dime from my personal checking account. It was a corporate residence fully paid for by Apex Medical Logistics. I had leased it months ago in preparation for the intense transition period of selling my company, knowing I would need a secure, private space to conduct late-night meetings with corporate buyers. I walked into the home office, opened my laptop, and went to work. For the next several days, I barely slept. I was finalizing the mountains of paperwork for the Horizon Health acquisition. The buyers were incredibly eager. They were not paying $45 million for a fleet of delivery trucks. They were paying for the proprietary infrastructure I had built from absolute scratch. Years ago, while Jamal was busy climbing the corporate ladder and mocking my grease-stained clothes, I had noticed a massive, glaring vulnerability in the Georgia healthcare system. Hospitals were routinely losing viable transplant organs and critical blood supplies because standard medical couriers lacked efficient routing software and reliable medical-grade refrigeration. I took out a loan, bought a single-used van, and custom retrofitted it with state-of-the-art temperature controls and real-time tracking sensors. I pitched my services directly to the hospital board of directors. I proved I could transport critical medical supplies faster and safer than anyone else in the state. One van turned into 5. 5 turned into 50. My logistics network became the irreplaceable nervous system for the largest hospital conglomerate in the Southeast. I was not just a driver, I was a pioneer in medical logistics, and as I digitally signed the final release forms, transferring ownership of Apex Medical to Horizon Health, a profound sense of peace washed over me. The money was officially secured in a protected corporate holding account, entirely shielded by the post-nuptial agreement Jamal had forced me to sign. My peaceful solitude lasted exactly 4 days. On Thursday morning, my cell phone rang. Jamal's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring 3 times before calmly answering, placing the phone on speaker while I poured myself a cup of premium coffee. "Are you out of your mind?" Jamal screamed through the speaker, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of my penthouse. His polished, arrogant corporate persona was completely gone, replaced by frantic, sputtering rage. "Good morning to you too, Jamal," I replied, taking a slow sip from my mug. "Do not play games with me, Maya. I am standing at the concierge desk right now. I came down here to have your building access officially revoked, and this idiot property manager just handed me a 30-day vacate notice. He told me my keycard is being deactivated at the end of the month. What kind of identity theft are you pulling?" I leaned against the quartz counter. It is not identity theft, Jamal. It is basic reading comprehension. You should try it sometime. I am the primary resident of this condo, he yelled, his voice cracking slightly. I pay the homeowners association fees. I pay the power bill. I bought the imported leather sofa you were too cheap to chip in for. You cannot just forge a document and kick me out of my own home. I will call the police. I will have you arrested for fraud. You can call whoever you want, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. But when the police arrive, they are going to ask for proof of ownership. And unless you can magically produce a deed with your name on it, they are going to tell you exactly what the concierge just told you. You do not own that condo. You never did. Apex Medical Logistics owns it. You are just an authorized occupant, and the company has decided not to renew your temporary residency. There was a dead heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process the fact that for 3 years he had been bragging to his family about his luxury downtown real estate, when in reality, he was living in a corporate apartment owned by the very business he called a worthless hustle. You are lying, he breathed, though the panic in his voice betrayed him. You do not have the kind of capital to buy this place. You are bluffing to scare me into a better divorce settlement. I am calling my lawyer right now. We are going to subpoena every single document you have ever touched. Please do, I said smoothly. Have your lawyer pull the property records. They are public. Enjoy your day, Jamal. I ended the call and immediately dialed Elias. My attorney answered on the first ring, and I relayed the entire conversation to him word for word. I expected Elias to tell me to enforce the eviction immediately, but instead he let out a rich, booming laugh. Maya, you handled that perfectly, Elias said. But I want you to call the building management right now and tell them to rescind the 30-day vacate notice. Let him stay in the condo. I frowned, setting my coffee mug down. Let him stay. Why on earth would I let him stay in my property after he tried to throw me out on the street? Because of the math. Maya, Elias explained, his voice thick with legal strategy. Right now, Jamal is an occupant in a luxury corporate residence. If he stays, he is legally a tenant of your LLC. We are going to quietly start charging his side of the marital ledger, the premium corporate rental rate for every single day he remains on the premises. He is too arrogant and too stubborn to move out voluntarily, especially now that his pride is wounded. He wants to prove he cannot be pushed around. So we let him dig his heels in. Every day he stays, he racks up thousands of dollars in corporate rent debt. When we finally get to the asset division, I will deduct that massive debt directly from whatever minimal marital assets he actually possesses. We are going to let his ego bankrupt him. It was a brilliant, ruthless strategy. I made the call to the building management and authorized Jamal to remain on the premises on a month-to-month corporate lease basis, heavily documented for the upcoming court battle. I went back to managing my transition team at Horizon Health, leaving Jamal to steep in his own confusion and rage. A week passed without a word from him. He was likely meeting with his aggressive new divorce attorney, plotting ways to bleed me dry. He still operated under the firm delusion that I was broke and desperate, a narrative he and his family desperately needed to believe to feel superior. On Friday evening, my phone chimed with an incoming text message. It was from Jamal. There was no text, just a photograph. It was a picture of Jamal lounging on the deck of a massive luxury catamaran. The brilliant blue waters of Cabo San Lucas stretched out behind him. He was wearing an expensive linen shirt, holding a crystal glass of amber liquor, and flashing a wide, triumphant smile at the camera. A few seconds later, a text bubbled up underneath the photo. Celebrating dropping dead weight, the message read. Enjoy the job hunt. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to rub his supposed freedom and immense wealth in my face. He wanted me sitting in some dark, cheap motel room, crying over the fabulous life he was living without me. But Jamal was arrogant, and arrogant men are always sloppy. I did not get angry. I simply zoomed in on the photograph. The sunlight in Cabo was incredibly bright, and Jamal was wearing a pair of highly reflective, oversized designer aviator sunglasses. In the mirrored reflection of his right lens, the image was distorted but perfectly clear. He was not alone. Sitting across from him on the deck of the catamaran, holding a matching crystal glass, was a young woman in a bright red bikini. She had long dark hair and was leaning forward, smiling intimately at him. Jamal had just handed me the exact piece of leverage I needed. He was taking luxury international vacations while claiming in his preliminary divorce filings that he needed to protect his finances from my draining influence. I saved the photograph, took a highly magnified screenshot of the reflection in his sunglasses, and opened a new message to Elias. I attached both images and typed a simple direct command: find out who she is and find out whose money paid for the flights. I sent that magnified photograph of Jamal and his mystery woman to Elias on a Friday evening. By Monday morning, the legal bombardment officially began. Jamal did not just want a divorce. He wanted absolute annihilation. He hired one of the most notoriously aggressive family law attorneys in Atlanta, a man whose entire reputation was built on bleeding the opposing party dry. The strategy was painfully transparent. They wanted to paper me to death. Within 48 hours, a courier delivered 4 massive banker boxes of discovery requests to Elias's office. They demanded every single personal financial record I possessed from the last 7 years. They wanted grocery receipts, Deep's gas station logs, old tax returns, and granular details of my personal checking history. Jamal was operating under the firm, arrogant delusion that I was sitting in a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, crying over my empty wallet and completely incapable of paying Elias's retainer fee. He thought that by burying me in relentless legal paperwork, he would exhaust my non-existent funds and force me to surrender by default. He wanted me to call him begging for a settlement just to make the legal bills stop. Instead, I sat comfortably in the sleek glass-walled conference room of Elias's firm, sipping sparkling water and systematically matching Jamal's financial disclosures against our joint tax returns. Sifting through those records was like reading the diary of a stranger. For 10 years, Jamal had projected this flawless image of black corporate excellence. He walked around our condo acting like an untouchable financial genius who was benevolently carrying his struggling blue-collar wife. But the bank statement spread across the mahogany table painted a brutally pathetic picture of a deeply insecure man. I traced my finger over a line item from 2 years ago. It was a charge for $4,000 at a luxury exotic car rental agency. I perfectly remembered that weekend. It was his college homecoming. He had told me his firm provided a corporate vehicle for his travel. In reality, he had siphoned our joint savings to rent a Bentley, just so he could pull up to his alumni events looking like a millionaire. I found massive recurring tabs at VIP sections in exclusive Atlanta nightclubs, places he claimed he was going to network with potential clients. He was buying thousands of dollars in premium champagne to impress people who did not even care about his actual character. The hypocrisy was staggering. I vividly remembered the nights I sat at our kitchen table covered in grease from rotating the tires on my first medical transport vans, asking him to temporarily adjust our household budget so I could afford proper refrigeration units for the hospital routes. He had sneered at me, calling my business investments a reckless waste of capital. He had lectured me about financial responsibility and the importance of liquidity. Meanwhile, he was secretly dropping $2,000 on custom-tailored suits and buying rounds of drinks for strangers to mask his own hollow insecurities. I used my dedication and my willingness to live modestly as a cover for his own reckless vanity. Elias sat across from me, reviewing a stack of credit card statements with a sharp, calculating gaze. He did not complain about the mountain of discovery paperwork Jamal's aggressive lawyer had sent. In fact, Elias welcomed it. We played the game exactly how Jamal wanted it played. We happily handed over every single requested document regarding my personal finances. My individual checking account, which I kept strictly separated from my corporate LLC holding accounts, showed a stagnant balance of exactly $2,000. I could picture Jamal sitting in his lawyer's lavish office looking at that pathetic $2,000 balance and laughing until his sides hurt. I knew his mother Vivian and his brother Terrence were probably sitting right there with him, patting him on the back and celebrating my supposed financial ruin. They were so fiercely focused on my seemingly tragic net worth that they completely ignored the quiet surgical trap Elias was setting around them. While Jamal was gloating over my personal checking account, Elias had quietly brought in a top-tier forensic accountant to run a comb through Jamal's end of the disclosures. We knew Jamal made a lucrative six-figure salary. We knew his annual corporate bonuses were substantial. But the numbers he officially reported in his initial divorce filings simply did not add up. The lifestyle he was funding and the assets he claimed to possess had a massive glaring discrepancy. We started matching the dates of his supposed out-of-state business trips to the mystery charges on his secondary credit cards. The woman in the sunglasses reflection from his boastful Cabo vacation photo was just the tip of the iceberg. Jamal had been quietly diverting his quarterly corporate bonuses away from our joint accounts for nearly 4 years. He funneled the money through a labyrinth of small, seemingly innocuous transfers to avoid triggering any fraud alerts at our primary bank. I thought because he worked in corporate finance, he was the smartest person in any room. He believed he could outsmart the legal system and hide his wealth while simultaneously demanding that I hand over whatever meager savings I possessed. He severely underestimated the power of a woman who had spent a decade building a highly regulated millions of dollars logistics network from the ground up. I knew how to track assets. I knew how to follow the paper trail. As the week progressed, the legal warfare intensified. Jamal's attorney sent a strongly worded email threatening to file a motion to compel claiming that I was intentionally hiding my business ledgers. Elias simply replied with a copy of the post-nuptial agreement Jamal had forced me to sign 3 years prior. Elias politely reminded opposing counsel that Jamal had legally, permanently, and voluntarily severed all rights to request review or claim any financial information regarding my corporate entities. The silence from Jamal's legal team after that email was deafening. They were trapped by their own client's arrogance. They could not touch my business, so they doubled down on trying to drain my personal funds, demanding alimony and claiming Jamal had suffered severe emotional distress from carrying my financial burdens for a decade. I spent my evenings in my luxury penthouse completely unbothered by his legal threats, focusing entirely on expanding Horizon Health's new regional distribution centers. I was making executive decisions worth tens of millions of dollars by day and reviewing Jamal's pathetic attempts to hide a few $1,000s in hotel charges by night. The dichotomy of our lives was almost poetic. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, I received an urgent text from Elias asking me to come to his office immediately. The tone of his message was unusually brief, lacking his typical legal formalities. I left my corporate transition team in the middle of a strategy meeting, grabbed my coat, and drove straight to his firm. When I walked into his office, the forensic accountant was already packing up his briefcase. Elias was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the gray Atlanta skyline, with a deeply satisfied expression on his face. The massive boxes of Jamal's financial disclosures were stacked neatly on his desk, but a single slim manila folder sat isolated in the center of the leather blotter. "Have a seat," Maya Elias said, turning around and gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I sat down, smoothing my skirt. "Did we find the paper trail for the mystery woman in Cabo? We found a lot more than a vacation fling," Elias replied, walking over and placing his hands flat on the desk. "Jamal is playing a very dangerous, very stupid game. He thinks because he works in finance he understands international banking laws better than the experts." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What did you find?" Elias tapped the slim manila folder with his index finger. "We tracked his missing corporate bonuses. All those small random withdrawals he made over the last 4 years did not just go toward buying designer suits and funding his mistress. He was aggressively funneling marital assets through a shell company registered in Delaware." I stared at the folder, the reality of Jamal's long-term deception settling heavily over me. "A shell company for what?" Elias opened the folder and slid a highly redacted, internationally flagged banking document across the desk toward me. "Maya, Jamal is not just hiding a mistress," Elias said, his voice dropping to a serious, razor-sharp pitch. "He is hiding a $200,000 offshore investment account in the Cayman Islands. And by failing to declare it on his sworn financial disclosures yesterday morning, he is about to commit perjury in a court of law." I stared at the offshore banking document sitting on Elias's desk, the reality of Jamal's financial betrayal washing over me in cold, sobering waves. He had not just skimmed a few bonuses to pay for lavish weekends. He had systematically built a shadow life, hoarding wealth in the Cayman Islands while looking me in the eye every night, and lecturing me about our household budget. Elias gathered the papers, slipping them back into the manila folder with a satisfied tap. "We do not strike yet," Elias warned, his voice steady. "We let him walk into the mandatory mediation session tomorrow morning, believing he holds all the leverage. We let him put his demands on the official record." The next morning, the air conditioning in the downtown mediation center felt excessively cold. I walked into the glass-walled lobby wearing a simple, understated beige suit. I had deliberately chosen an outfit that looked professional but modest, playing perfectly into the narrative Jamal had constructed of his struggling, soon-to-be destitute wife. Elias walked beside me, his briefcase looking deceptively light. When we turned the corner into the main waiting area, I realized Jamal had not just come to negotiate, he had come to put on a theatrical production. Jamal was seated on a plush leather sofa wearing a sharp charcoal suit. But he was not alone. Sitting pressed tightly against his side, holding a designer coffee cup, was a young woman who could not have been a day over 24. I recognized her instantly from the corporate directories Jamal used to leave open on his home office computer. Her name was Jasmine. She was a junior financial analyst at his firm, a subordinate he directly managed. She was wearing a dress that was entirely too short for a legal proceeding, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders as she giggled at something Jamal whispered in her ear. If bringing his young mistress to a marital mediation was not insulting enough, the supporting cast he brought along truly sealed the spectacle. Standing near the coffee station, speaking at a volume clearly intended for me to hear, were Vivian and Chloe. My mother-in-law and my white sister-in-law had apparently decided this legal proceeding was a spectator sport. Chloe was gesturing wildly with her hands, examining Jasmine from across the room like a prized racehorse. "It is just so refreshing to see Jamal with someone who actually understands the corporate world," Chloe announced, her voice echoing off the marble floors. "Someone who can stand beside him at company galas without looking like she just clocked out of a warehouse shift. It is a massive upgrade, honestly." Vivian nodded emphatically, adjusting her silk scarf. "A man of his caliber needs a woman of high caliber. The universe is finally correcting his one major mistake." I did not break my stride. I did not glare at them. I simply walked over to the receptionist, gave my name, and took a seat on the opposite side of the lobby. Elias sat next to me, scrolling through his phone with absolute indifference to the circus performing across the room. Jamal caught my eye and smirked, pulling Jasmine a little closer to his chest. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to scream, to cry, to lunge across the lobby and validate his narrative that I was an unstable, emotional burden. I gave him absolutely nothing but a placid, unbothered blink. The mediator, a stern-looking older man, stepped out of the conference room and called our names. Vivian, Chloe, and Jasmine were forced to remain in the lobby, though Chloe shot me a deeply condescending glare as I walked past. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere immediately shifted from a social spectacle to aggressive legal warfare. Jamal sat across the long mahogany table from me, flanked by his cutthroat attorney. The lawyer did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He aggressively slid a thick bound document across the table toward Elias. "We are here to expedite this process." Jamal's lawyer began, his tone sharp and dismissive. "My client is willing to offer a highly generous one-time settlement to conclude this marriage. We propose a lopsided asset split heavily favoring my client given that he was the sole financial provider for the duration of the union. In exchange, my client will not seek restitution for the thousands of dollars he wasted propping up your client's failing medical courier hobby." I looked down at the document. It was laughable. Jamal was offering me a flat $20,000 and demanding he keep 100% of all joint savings, his retirement accounts, and the corporate condo. But the most audacious part was buried on page 3. Furthermore, the lawyer continued, leaning aggressively over the table. "My client is formally requesting transitional alimony." Elias raised an eyebrow, feigning absolute shock. "Alimony, your client makes a high six-figure corporate salary. My client drives transport vans. On what grounds are you demanding alimony?" "Emotional and financial distress," Jamal answered directly, leaning back in his chair with an air of absolute entitlement. "I spent a decade funding her life. I paid the bills. I bought the groceries. I subsidized her little business ventures that never turned a profit. I drained my own potential trying to keep her afloat. I am entitled to compensation for the resources she siphoned from me. Jamal's lawyer tapped the table. If your client refuses to sign this settlement today, we will drag her failing business through a comprehensive, highly publicized public audit. We will subpoena every single vendor, every hospital contract, and every debt ledger associated with Apex Medical Logistics. We will expose exactly how deep in the red she truly is. By the time we are done with the discovery phase, she will owe the court more in legal fees than her entire operation is worth. Sign the agreement or we burn her business to the ground. It was the ultimate intimidation tactic. They thought the threat of a massive corporate audit would terrify me. They thought I was hiding a mountain of business debt. They had no idea that a public audit of Apex Medical Logistics was exactly what I needed to officially introduce the $45 million Horizon Health acquisition into the public court record. But I could not let them know that yet. I had to play my part. I lowered my eyes, letting my shoulders slump forward. I brought my hands up to my face, deliberately making my fingers tremble just a fraction. I looked over at Elias with wide, manufactured panic in my eyes. Elias, I whispered, ensuring my voice sounded tight and fearful. An audit. If they audit the logistics accounts, the legal fees alone will bankrupt me. I cannot afford to fight a corporate audit right now. Elias played his role masterfully. He let out a heavy, defeated sigh, rubbing his temples as if he were trying to salvage a losing battle. Maya, if they force a forensic audit on your LLC, it will take months. The litigation costs will be astronomical. We might have to consider their terms. Jamal's smile practically stretched off his face. He looked at his lawyer with triumphant, vindicated glee. He had broken me. He had used his corporate might to crush his blue-collar wife into total submission. What do you want? I asked, keeping my head bowed, my voice sounding incredibly small in the large conference room. We want full financial transparency across the board. Jamal's lawyer demanded, pushing a secondary agreement across the table. We want a mutual stipulation signed right now, agreeing to a fast-tracked court date. We want to skip the prolonged discovery battles and go straight before a judge next month to finalize this asset division based on the accounts currently on record. They wanted to lock in the financial snapshots exactly as they looked today. Jamal wanted to freeze the records before anyone could look too closely at his recent banking history. He wanted to fast-track the divorce so he could keep his Cayman Islands account perfectly hidden and move on to his shiny new life with his subordinate mistress. I looked at the document. It was a binding stipulation demanding full, unredacted financial transparency under penalty of severe judicial sanctions, combined with a motion to expedite the final hearing. It was everything Elias and I needed, wrapped up with a neat little bow handed to us by the very people trying to destroy me. I took a shaky breath, picked up my pen, and signed my name on the dotted line. I pushed the paper back across the mahogany table. Jamal let out a loud, booming laugh. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated victory. He grabbed the document, hastily scribbled his own signature next to mine, and slid it over to his lawyer. He truly believed he had just outsmarted everyone. He thought he had successfully protected his hidden offshore wealth, secured a pathway to claim alimony, and completely insulated himself from my supposedly debt-ridden company. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, not even looking at me as he prepared to walk out to the lobby where his mother, his sister-in-law, and his mistress were waiting to celebrate his absolute dominance. I had no idea that by demanding full financial transparency and signing that specific expedited legal stipulation, he had just legally bound himself to the forensic accounting standards that would expose his offshore fraud to the judge. Jamal thought he had just won the war. He did not realize Elias had just handed him a legally binding rope, and Jamal had gleefully tied the knot himself. The fallout from that mediation session moved faster than a freight train. Jamal had strutted out of the conference center, absolutely convinced he held every single card in the deck. He thought his demand for an expedited, fully transparent financial review was going to expose my supposed poverty and protect his hidden offshore wealth. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he completely missed the trap Elias had laid right at his feet. But setting the trap was only the first step. We needed Jamal to willingly lock himself inside it. Within 48 hours of the mediation, Elias drafted a highly specific pretrial stipulation regarding the division of our business entities. It was a masterpiece of legal bait. Elias worded the document to sound as though I was desperately trying to keep my medical logistics company categorized as a marital asset, subtly implying that I needed Jamal's corporate salary to help absorb my mounting operational debts. The reaction from Jamal's legal team was instantaneous and violently aggressive. They took one look at Elias's drafted stipulation and practically tripped over themselves to reject it. Jamal's cutthroat lawyer immediately fired back a countermotion aggressively demanding that the court strictly enforce the post-nuptial agreement Jamal had forced me to sign 3 years ago. They were absolutely terrified. In their minds, Apex Medical Logistics was a failing, debt-ridden nightmare. They believed that if the business was classified as a joint marital asset, Jamal's pristine credit score and his six-figure corporate salary would be dragged down to pay off my non-existent creditors. Elias played his part perfectly. He sent a few emails feigning reluctance, pretending that we were devastated by their refusal to share the business liabilities. This only made Jamal's lawyer push harder. They demanded an emergency preliminary hearing to officially and permanently sever Jamal from my business entities before the final divorce decree could even be drafted. They wanted him legally insulated from my failures, and they wanted it done on the public record. The morning of the preliminary hearing brought a heavy torrential downpour to the streets of Atlanta. I parked my modest 5-year-old sedan in the public lot across from the Fulton County Courthouse. I wore a simple black raincoat over a conservative navy pantsuit, holding a large umbrella against the driving wind. As I made my way toward the covered walkway of the security entrance, I heard the unmistakable booming sound of my brother-in-law's voice. Terrence and Jamal were standing under the massive stone archway, shielded from the rain, holding expensive artisan coffees. They were waiting for me. Terrence had always been the loudest, most obnoxious member of Jamal's family. He lacked Jamal's corporate discipline, but he made up for it with sheer unearned arrogance. He loved to tear other people down to elevate his own fragile ego, and he had always viewed my blue-collar work ethic as a personal insult to their family's polished image. "Look who finally made it!" Terrence announced, his voice carrying over the sound of the pouring rain. He nudged Jamal with his elbow and pointed his coffee cup directly at me. "I see you are still driving that beat-up sedan, Maya." Chloe was right. We really should have given you some gas money to make sure you could actually get to the courthouse today. I shook off my umbrella, keeping my expression entirely neutral as I stepped under the stone archway. "Good morning, Terrence." Jamal adjusted the lapels of his custom-tailored gray suit, looking down his nose at me. "You look exhausted, Maya. The stress of running a failing business must really be getting to you. You should have just taken the $10,000 buyout I offered you at the restaurant. Now my lawyer is going to make sure you leave this marriage with absolutely nothing." Terrence laughed, a harsh grating sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You really thought you could trick my brother into paying off your business loans, did you not? You thought you could use his corporate money to save your little delivery gig. You seriously underestimated who you are dealing with. Jamal is a financial genius. He saw this coming 3 years ago. That post-nup is going to protect every single dime he has ever earned." I looked back and forth between the two brothers. They were so incredibly proud of themselves. They stood there in their expensive suits, mocking the woman who had spent a decade building an empire right under their noses. They thought my silence was defeat. They did not understand it was simply the quiet before the execution. "I am just trying to protect what little I have left," I said softly, lowering my gaze to the wet pavement to give them the exact performance of a broken woman they desperately needed to see. Terrence scoffed, shaking his head in disgust. "You have nothing left, Maya. You played a stupid game and now you are going to pay the price. Let us go inside, Jamal. I cannot stand breathing this loser energy anymore." They turned and marched through the security checkpoint, completely high on their own manufactured superiority. I waited a full minute before following them, taking a deep, steadying breath. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was strictly business. The judge presiding over our preliminary hearing was a seasoned, no-nonsense magistrate who had zero tolerance for wasted time. She sat high behind the wooden bench, looking over the documents Jamal's lawyer had frantically filed the day before. Elias sat calmly beside me at the plaintiff's table, his posture relaxed, his hands folded neatly over his legal pad. Across the aisle, Jamal sat with his chest puffed out, looking like a man who had already won the championship. Your Honor. Jamal's attorney began standing up and speaking with aggressive theatricality. We requested this emergency preliminary hearing to establish absolute impenetrable financial boundaries before we proceed to the final asset division. The plaintiff. Miss Maya operates a logistics business that we have reason to believe carries significant operational debt. My client was the sole breadwinner of this household for a decade. He took proactive, legally binding steps 3 years ago to shield his corporate earnings from the plaintiff's highly unstable business ventures. The judge flipped through a few pages. You are referring to the post-nuptial agreement signed in 2023. Exactly, Your Honor, the lawyer confirmed loudly. We are submitting a sworn affidavit today affirming that my client wishes to enforce this document to its absolute maximum legal extent. We want it on the official court record that Jamal permanently waives any right, interest, or claim to Apex Medical Logistics, its assets, its debts, and any subsequent sales or liquidations of the entity. We want a complete legal firewall. The judge looked over her glasses at Elias. Does the plaintiff contest the enforcement of this post-nuptial agreement? Elias stood up slowly, putting on a masterful display of manufactured hesitation. Your Honor, my client dedicated 10 years to this marriage. It seems highly inequitable that her husband wishes to completely wash his hands of the business she built during their union. We believe the marital assets should be viewed holistically. Jamal's lawyer practically jumped over his own table. Absolutely not. The contract is binding. My client will not be held responsible for a sinking ship. The judge sighed, turning her attention directly to Jamal. Mr. Jamal, please stand up. Jamal stood buttoning his suit jacket with a confident smirk. The court needs to be absolutely clear on your intentions, the judge stated, her voice echoing through the quiet room. You understand that by reaffirming this post-nuptial agreement under oath today, you are legally locking yourself out of any future claims regarding your wife's business. If this company suddenly becomes profitable, or if it is sold, you will have zero legal standing to claim a single penny of that revenue. Do you fully understand and accept those terms? I held my breath. This was the moment of absolute no return. Jamal did not even hesitate. He looked directly at me, his eyes full of malicious, arrogant triumph. Then he looked up at the judge. I understand completely, Your Honor, Jamal said, his voice loud and unwavering. Her business is a massive liability. It is a sinking ship, and I want absolutely nothing to do with it. I willingly and permanently surrender all claims to Apex Medical Logistics. The judge nodded, picking up her pen. Very well. Please approach the bailiff and sign the sworn affidavit. I watched as Jamal practically jogged over to the bailiff's desk. He picked up the pen and signed his name with a massive, sweeping flourish. He was smiling so hard it looked like his face might split in half. He walked back to his table, patting his lawyer on the shoulder, convinced he had just pulled off the greatest financial maneuver of his entire life. The judge stamped the document, entering it officially and permanently into the court record. The post-nuptial agreement was now an ironclad, judicially enforced mandate. The firewall was built. My $45 million acquisition was now completely legally untouchable. Court is adjourned until the final settlement hearing next month, the judge announced, striking her gavel. Jamal did not even look at me as he left the courtroom. He strutted out the double wooden doors, eager to find Terrence in the hallway and celebrate how he had just legally destroyed his soon-to-be ex-wife. I remained seated at the plaintiff's table, listening to the heavy wooden doors swing shut. I let out a long, slow exhale, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. The medical logistics firm I had bled for, the empire I had built through sleepless nights and grease-stained hands, was finally safe. Elias neatly packed his legal pad into his leather briefcase and snapped it shut. He turned to me, a brilliant, sharp smile spreading across his face. We walked out of the courtroom together in comfortable silence, navigating the busy hallways and heading out toward the parking lot. The heavy rain had finally stopped, leaving the Atlanta air feeling clean and incredibly crisp. The gray clouds were beginning to break apart, letting bright shafts of sunlight reflect off the wet pavement. As we reached our cars, Elias paused with his hand on his door handle. He looked back at me, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of a perfectly executed legal strategy. "He just locked the door from the outside," Elias said, smiling. "Now we let him set the house on fire." Elias was entirely correct. Jamal did not just set a fire. He poured gasoline over his own reputation and struck the match himself. Thinking he had completely immunized himself from my supposedly massive business debts. Jamal and his family decided it was time to take a victory lap. And their version of a victory lap involved trying to publicly destroy whatever tiny shred of dignity they thought I had left. The social war began immediately. Chloe took to the internet with a vicious, relentless energy. My phone constantly buzzed with screenshots sent by mutual acquaintances who were horrified by her blatant cruelty. Chloe posted a meticulously curated photo of herself and Jamal holding espresso cups at a high-end cafe, accompanied by a caption that read, "So proud of my brother-in-law for finally dropping the dead weight." It is exhausting watching successful corporate men being held back by deadbeat wives who refuse to get a real job. Here is to new beginnings and high standards. She made sure the post was public. She wanted everyone in our extended social circle to see it, to agree with her, and to laugh at my expense. Vivian was doing her part offline. She treated her weekly country club luncheons and church committee meetings like press conferences. According to the few friends who remained loyal to me, Vivian was actively spreading a rumor that I was currently living out of a budget motel on the side of the highway. She told anyone who would listen that Jamal had gracefully offered me a generous severance, but that my reckless spending on my little delivery hobby had left me completely destitute. She painted her son as a saint who had finally escaped a financial parasite. I did not retaliate. I did not post a single rebuttal. I sat in my corporate penthouse sipping green tea and let them spin their elaborate, pathetic fairy tales. They were so busy trying to win the court of public opinion that they had no idea the actual court of law was about to crush them into dust. The perfect opportunity to finalize the quiet transition of my company arrived a week later. Horizon Health was hosting its annual charity gala, a massive, highly exclusive event held at one of the most prestigious luxury hotels in downtown Atlanta. This was not a standard corporate mixer. It was a $1,000 a plate event, attended by the absolute elite of the city. Hospital administrators, top-tier surgeons, and managing partners of massive financial firms filled the guest list. I was invited as a guest of honor, though my status was still under strict non-disclosure until the ink on the final merger documents dried that very evening. I spent 2 hours getting ready. I wore a custom-tailored emerald green evening gown that draped perfectly, paired with understated diamond earrings that screamed old money rather than new flash. I did not look like a woman living in a motel. I looked like a woman who owned the building. I arrived in a chauffeured black car, stepping out onto the red carpet. The ballroom was breathtaking, filled with towering floral arrangements, soft jazz music, and waiters circulating with trays of vintage champagne. I mingled quietly, speaking with the board members of Horizon Health, finalizing the last verbal agreements of our $45 million acquisition. And then across the sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns, I spotted him. Jamal. I was standing near one of the massive ice sculptures, holding a drink and looking around the room with hungry, desperate eyes. He was trying to network. His mid-level corporate finance firm had likely bought a single table at the back of the room, and Jamal was using the opportunity to try and climb the corporate ladder, hoping to rub shoulders with the executives who actually ran the city. Clinging to his arm was Jasmine. She was wearing a sequined dress that was entirely too loud and inappropriate for a black-tie corporate charity event. She looked completely out of her depth, shifting uncomfortably in her heels, while Jamal ignored her, scanning the crowd for anyone important he could introduce himself to. The inevitable happened. Jamal turned his head and locked eyes with me. I watched the progression of emotions flash across his face. First shock, then intense confusion, and finally a dark, simmering rage. In his mind, I was supposed to be sitting in a cheap motel crying over my frozen bank accounts. I was certainly not supposed to be standing in the center of the most exclusive ballroom in Atlanta, wearing a gown that cost more than his monthly car payment. He shoved his drink into Jasmine's hand and marched directly across the ballroom toward me, his face twisted into an ugly scowl. He was ready to cause a massive scene. He wanted to humiliate me in front of the city's elite to prove to himself that he still held all the power. Maya, what the hell are you doing here? He demanded, his voice a harsh, angry hiss as he closed the distance between us. His eyes darted up and down my dress, trying to calculate how I could possibly afford it. Did you sneak in through the service elevator? Are you working the catering staff tonight? I took a slow, elegant sip of my champagne, looking at him with absolute indifference. Good evening, Jamal. I am attending the gala just like you, though I imagine our invitations came from very different sources. He stepped closer, trying to use his height to intimidate me. Do not play games with me. Tickets to this event are $1,000 a head. I know exactly how much money you have in your pathetic little checking account. Who brought you here? Did you find some rich old man to fund your lifestyle now that I cut you off? You need to leave before you embarrass yourself and drag my professional reputation down with you. I am networking with vice presidents tonight. I cannot have my broke, soon-to-be ex-wife loitering around the ballroom looking for a handout. Jasmine caught up to him, grabbing his arm and glaring at me with juvenile hostility. Jamal, who is this? She asked, though she clearly knew exactly who I was. Jamal opened his mouth to deliver what I am sure would have been a profoundly insulting introduction, but he never got the chance. A booming, jovial voice echoed from behind me. Maya, there you are. I have been looking for you all evening. I turned to see Harrison, the chief executive officer of Horizon Health, striding toward us with a massive, welcoming smile. He was a man who commanded absolute authority, someone Jamal would have given his right arm just to shake hands with. Harrison bypassed Jamal, completely stepping up to me and warmly grasping both of my hands. I was just telling the board that we need to officially welcome you to the family, Harrison announced, his voice carrying easily over the soft jazz music, catching the attention of several high-profile executives standing nearby. Harrison turned slightly, acknowledging Jamal and Jasmine for the first time, assuming they were my guests. He beamed at them. I hope you two are celebrating our guest of honor tonight. We are absolutely thrilled to have Maya joining the Horizon Health Executive Board. Her medical logistics network is going to completely revolutionize our supply chain. The $45 million acquisition we finalized this morning is the best investment this hospital conglomerate has made in a decade. We are incredibly lucky she agreed to the buyout. The color instantly violently drained from Jamal's face. He looked as though all the air had been forcefully punched out of his lungs. He stared at Harrison, then stared at me, his mouth hanging slightly open in absolute paralyzed shock. The words $45 million acquisition seemed to physically strike him, scrambling his brain as he tried to reconcile the staggering figure with the woman he had spent 10 years treating like a worthless burden. Jamal tried to speak. He tried to form a sentence, but only a raspy, choked sound escaped his throat. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand reaching out as if he were trying to grab the reality that was rapidly slipping away from him. His sudden, erratic movement caught the attention of the private hotel security detail standing near the ice sculpture. Seeing a visibly agitated, sweating man reaching aggressively toward the guest of honor and the CEO of the hosting conglomerate, two large security guards immediately stepped in. They flanked Jamal in seconds, firmly gripping him by the arms. "Sir, we need you to step back," one of the guards ordered in a low, dangerous tone. Jamal could not even protest. He was entirely catatonic, completely shattered by the weight of his own monumental mistake. As the security guards swiftly ushered a paralyzed Jamal and a panicked Jasmine toward the ballroom exit, I turned back to Harrison, clinked my champagne glass against his, and offered a brilliant, victorious smile. We were seated in a heavily air-conditioned, sterile conference room inside his lawyer's downtown firm. A black video camera sat on a tripod at the end of the long table, a small red light blinking steadily to record every word. Jamal sat across from me, radiating a sickening level of smug confidence. His cutthroat attorney leaned forward, treating the deposition like a criminal interrogation. The lawyer launched into a relentless, aggressive grilling designed to paint me as a complete financial parasite. He shoved copies of old bank statements across the table, highlighting every time Jamal had paid our standard household utility bills. You spent a decade burning through my client's hard-earned corporate income to fund a glorified delivery hobby, did you not? The lawyer demanded, his voice sharp and accusatory. You relied entirely on his six-figure salary to keep a roof over your head while you played business owner. I kept my posture perfectly straight, my hands folded neatly on the table. I contributed my fair share to our household. I answered calmly, giving them exactly the measured, unbothered responses Elias had coached me to provide. Your fair share, the lawyer scoffed loudly for the camera. My client has suffered severe emotional and financial distress from subsidizing your life. He is demanding transitional alimony and sole possession of all remaining marital assets to recoup the immense losses he incurred while propping you up. You drained him, Maya. You used his corporate success as a safety net for your failures. I did not argue. I let them build their towering monument of lies on the official video record. They were so focused on securing a few $1,000s in alimony that they were completely ignoring the massive legal blind spots they were creating. The true depth of their coordinated smear campaign became brutally apparent later that week during a related preliminary hearing for temporary spousal support. The hearing took place in a crowded Fulton County courtroom, and Jamal had brought his entire family to pack the gallery. Chloe was called to the stand as a character witness for Jamal. My white sister-in-law walked past the wooden swinging doors, wearing a conservative pastel dress, looking like the picture of suburban innocence. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and then proceeded to deliver an absolutely breathtaking performance of perjury. When Jamal's lawyer began questioning her about our financial dynamics, Chloe clutched a tissue and put on a mask of deep sympathetic concern. It was honestly heartbreaking to watch Chloe testify, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic to anyone who did not know her true nature. Maya was completely financially unstable. She was always struggling, always in over her head. I personally witnessed her begging Jamal for money just to cover her basic grocery bills. Jamal was a saint. He worked so hard to provide a beautiful life for her, but her delivery business was a black hole. She constantly demanded cash from him to fix her broken-down trucks. She dragged his mental health down for years. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my face a mask of stone, watching her fabricate an entire history of my desperation. Chloe had never seen me beg for a dime. She had spent the last decade rolling her eyes at me at family barbecues and making snide comments about my work boots. But here she was under oath, happily committing perjury, just to ensure her brother-in-law could extract alimony from me. She wanted to financially ruin me just as much as he did. The temporary support hearing ended shortly afterward. Several days later, we returned to Jamal's attorney's office to complete his formal deposition. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a second stack of documents. This stack was significantly thicker than the first. The atmosphere in the deposition room shifted instantly. You could feel the air pressure drop. Jamal leaned back in his chair, still confident that his post-nuptial agreement had placed my company beyond the scope of the dispute. He thought the worst was over. I thought Elias had given up on dragging any money out of him because my business was supposedly a lost cause. Mr. Jamal, Elias began, his voice taking on a conversational, almost friendly tone. Since we have established your absolute disinterest in my client's business affairs, let us shift our focus to your personal financial disclosures. Specifically, your expenditures over the last 36 months. Jamal scoffed, shooting a look at his attorney. My money is my money. We established that 3 years ago. Indeed we did, Elias replied smoothly. But for the purpose of determining alimony and evaluating your claim of severe financial distress, we need to understand exactly how much distress you are actually in. Elias slid a glossy, high-resolution photograph across the table. It was the picture Jamal had texted me from Cabo San Lucas. The one with the bright blue water, the expensive linen shirt, and the clear reflection of Jasmine sitting across from him in her red bikini. Can you identify this photograph for the official record? Elias asked. Jamal's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He glanced at the photo and quickly looked away, adjusting his cuffs. It is a picture of me on a boat. So what? A luxury catamaran in Cabo San Lucas, to be precise, Elias corrected, tapping the paper. Taken just last month. According to your financial disclosures, you claim to be drowning in debt due to my client's financial drain. Yet your secondary credit card statements show a charge of $8,000 for this weekend excursion, a trip you took with your 24-year-old subordinate Jasmine. Jamal's lawyer immediately slammed his hand on the table. Objection. My client's personal travel is irrelevant to the division of marital assets, especially given the post-nuptial agreement. It is highly relevant when he is demanding alimony based on financial hardship. Elias shot back, his voice cracking like a whip. He did not wait for a ruling. He simply slid another document across the table. Let us talk about October of last year. Elias continued relentlessly. $4,000 spent at a luxury exotic car rental agency in downtown Atlanta. You rented a Bentley for your college homecoming weekend. $2,000 spent at a VIP table at a nightclub in Buckhead the very next night. $5,000 at a designer boutique purchasing a handbag that my client certainly never received. I watched Jamal closely. For the first time all morning, he looked genuinely uncomfortable. The polished corporate facade was cracking. He reached up and loosened his expensive silk tie, shifting his weight in the heavy leather chair. He was a man obsessed with his image, and having his shallow, vanity-driven spending habits read aloud on a legal video record was deeply humiliating to him. I am a corporate finance director, Jamal snapped, leaning toward the camera to ensure his defense was captured. I have to maintain a certain image. Those were networking expenses. In my line of work, client acquisition requires entertaining. You have to look successful to attract successful clients. My wife would not understand that because she spends her days driving cargo vans and negotiating with warehouse managers. Networking, Elias repeated, dragging the word out slowly. So buying a $5,000 handbag for your junior analyst was a strategic corporate investment. Jamal's face flushed a deep, angry red. He slammed both hands down on the armrests of his chair. I earned that money. I worked 80-hour weeks in a high-pressure corporate environment while she was playing with refrigerated trucks. I had every right to spend my bonuses however I saw fit. We signed a post-nuptial agreement. That document protects my income from her just as much as it protects me from her liabilities. My money is my money. I was leaning so hard into his defense. He was clinging to that post-nuptial agreement like a life raft, completely oblivious to the fact that it was actually an anchor tied securely around his neck. You are absolutely right, Elias said, his tone suddenly dropping to a deadly quiet register. You did earn those corporate bonuses, and you had a strict legal obligation to disclose them during this divorce proceeding. Elias walked back to his briefcase. He bypassed the thick stack of credit card receipts and pulled out a single slim manila folder. It was the folder containing the forensic accountant's masterpiece. The room went dead silent. Jamal's lawyer sat up straighter, his eyes locked on that thin folder. Lawyers have a sixth sense for incoming disasters, and Jamal's attorney could smell the smoke pouring under the door. Elias pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was highly redacted, bearing the official stamps of international wire tracking. He did not slide it across the table. He held it in his hand, keeping it just out of Jamal's reach. Mr. Jamal, Elias said, his eyes locking onto my soon-to-be ex-husband. We noticed a very interesting pattern in your banking history. You have been making a series of small, seemingly unrelated cash withdrawals from your primary accounts over the last 4 years. Withdrawals carefully calculated to stay just under the federal reporting threshold. Jamal swallowed hard. I saw the exact moment the true panic set in. The vein in his neck began to pulse rapidly. He darted a panicked look at his lawyer, but his lawyer was staring at Elias, waiting for the axe to fall. We followed those withdrawals. Elias continued pacing slowly across the room. They were funneled into a domestic shell company registered in Delaware. And from Delaware, they were wired directly to a private financial institution outside of the United States. Objection, Jamal's lawyer shouted, his voice cracking with genuine alarm. This is outside the scope of the submitted discovery. We have not been provided with any documents regarding international transfers. Elias ignored the outburst. He stepped right up to the edge of the table holding the document so Jamal could see the unmistakable routing numbers printed at the top. The quiet hum of the air conditioning and the steady blinking red light of the recording camera were the only sounds in the room. "Then you explain to the court?" Elias asked, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Why you initiated a wire transfer of $200,000 to a private offshore investment account in the Cayman Islands. An account that you deliberately failed to disclose on your sworn financial affidavits yesterday morning." Jamal froze. He stopped breathing entirely. The color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a curb and realized a speeding truck was 6 inches away from his chest. He could not speak. He could not defend himself. He was caught dead to rights committing perjury on camera. His lawyer jumped out of his chair, waving his hands frantically. "Do not answer that. Do not say a single word. Elias, you are ambushing my client with unsubstantiated, unverified banking claims. We are stopping this deposition immediately. I demand to see that document right now." Elias did not hand the document over. Instead, he let out a soft, knowing chuckle. He looked at Jamal's terrified face, letting the absolute horror of the moment sink deep into Jamal's bones. Jamal knew we had him. He knew his secret shadow life was exposed, and he knew the severe criminal and financial penalties for hiding assets and committing perjury in a divorce proceeding. With a smooth, deliberate motion, Elias pulled the paper back and tucked it neatly into the manila folder. He closed the folder and gave Jamal's lawyer a brilliant, razor-sharp smile. "You know what, counsel, you are absolutely right," Elias said cheerfully, his tone completely at odds with the devastating bomb he had just dropped. "This is a highly complex financial matter. It really deserves proper judicial oversight." Elias turned back to the camera, buttoning his suit jacket. "My apologies for the confusion. We will simply save the offshore discussion for the judge at the final hearing next month. I have no further questions for this witness." Jamal sat frozen in his leather chair, staring blankly at the empty space on the table where the document had just been. The 30 days between the deposition and the final divorce decree. Hearing felt like the quiet, heavy stillness right before a massive thunderstorm breaks. Jamal had spent that entire month sweating over the brief glimpse of his Cayman Islands bank statement, but his arrogance remained his most fatal flaw. He and his cutthroat lawyer had somehow convinced themselves that Elias was just bluffing, or at worst, that Jamal would simply have to pay a minor financial penalty for the undisclosed offshore funds, because in Jamal's mind, my medical logistics company was still a worthless sinking ship. He genuinely believed his corporate salary was the only real money on the table, and he was determined to punish me for daring to challenge him. The morning of the final hearing, the oppressive thick Georgia humidity hung over the streets of downtown Atlanta. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the Fulton County Courthouse, the cool air conditioning washing over me as I stepped onto the polished marble floors of the main concourse. When I entered the courthouse, Jamal and his family were already waiting outside the courtroom, dressed as though they were preparing for a victory celebration. I did not arrive wearing my usual modest jeans or the simple, understated suits I had worn to the mediation. I arrived looking exactly like a woman who had just revolutionized the healthcare supply chain of the entire Southeast. I wore a bespoke, deep, plum-tailored suit that fit me with absolute razor-sharp perfection. A pristine silk blouse rested beneath the blazer, and my hair and makeup were flawlessly professionally styled. I was not just walking with Elias today. Flanking me were two senior corporate associates from Horizon Health, both dressed in immaculate dark suits, carrying sleek leather briefcases containing the final authenticated merger documents. We moved down the marble hallway with the synchronized, undeniable authority of a corporate takeover team. The laughter coming from Jamal's family died instantly. I watched the collective shock ripple through their little group. Vivian's mouth parted slightly, her eyes darting up and down my tailored suit, trying to calculate the cost of the fabric. Terrence pushed himself off the wall, his bravado momentarily faltering as he took in the two imposing corporate associates walking closely behind me. Jamal just stared, a flicker of deep, unsettling confusion crossing his features. This was not the broken, destitute woman he expected to see shuffling into the courthouse. Chloe, however, absolutely refused to let her narrative die. She quickly recovered from her shock and leaned over to Vivian, making sure to pitch her voice loud enough to carry across the quiet hallway. "She definitely rented that outfit?" Chloe scoffed, a nasty little sneer twisting her lips. "Probably maxed out a high-interest credit card just to put on a brave face for the judge. It is honestly pathetic how hard she is trying to look like she belongs in the corporate world. Look at those guys with her. She probably hired actors to carry her bags." Vivian nodded in agreement, adjusting her posture and giving me a look of profound pity. "Pride comes before the fall, Chloe. Jamal is about to take her for everything she has left. She will be returning that suit by 5 o'clock tonight." I did not break my stride. I did not offer them a single glance. I walked straight past their little group, projecting a serene, untouchable calm, and pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom. The atmosphere inside was strictly business. The judge presiding over our final asset division was a formidable, no-nonsense woman with decades of experience on the bench. She had a reputation across Fulton County for having zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics, hidden assets, or aggressive lawyers trying to bully opposing parties. She sat high behind the bench, organizing a massive stack of legal files with swift, efficient movements. Elias and I took our seats at the plaintiff's table. My two corporate associates sat directly behind us in the first row of the gallery, placing their leather briefcases on their laps. A moment later, Jamal strutted into the courtroom. He walked with a heavy, arrogant swagger, closely followed by his aggressive attorney, Vivian Terrence. Chloe and Jasmine filed into the gallery benches on the opposite side of the aisle. They looked like a highly invested studio audience leaning forward in their seats, eager to watch me get legally dismantled. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge looked down at us over the rim of her glasses. "We are here for the final review and execution of the Asset Division Decree," the judge announced, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "The court has reviewed the initial discovery documents and the proposed settlement demands submitted by the defense." She picked up Jamal's aggressive legal filing and began reading his demands into the official record. Her tone was flat and entirely unimpressed. "Mr. Jamal is requesting sole possession of the downtown condominium," the judge stated, flipping to the next page. "He is requesting 100% of the joint savings accounts. He is furthermore demanding transitional alimony, citing severe financial and emotional distress caused by the plaintiff's allegedly failing business ventures." Jamal sat up perfectly straight, adjusting his tie. He looked incredibly proud of his ruthless demands. From the gallery behind him, I could hear Chloe let out a soft, satisfied sigh. They truly believed the judge was just going to rubber stamp this absolute robbery. The judge set the paper down and looked directly at Jamal's lawyer. "Counsel, before we move to the final distribution, the court notes the sworn affidavit your client signed during the preliminary hearing last month. The post-nuptial agreement regarding the plaintiff's business entities." Jamal's lawyer practically leaped out of his chair, eager to secure his client's protection. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has been the sole financial provider for this household. He explicitly and permanently waived any and all rights, claims, or interests in Apex Medical Logistics. We established on the official record that my client wishes to be entirely legally severed from the plaintiff's corporate liabilities. We do not want her business debt bleeding into my client's hard-earned corporate assets." The judge looked at the affidavit, then looked back at Jamal. "And the defense maintains this position today. You view this business as a liability and waive all claims to its current or future valuation." "Absolutely, Your Honor." Jamal's lawyer confirmed loudly, making sure his voice echoed through the room. "We want a total legal firewall between my client and that business." I kept my eyes locked on the front of the courtroom, my face perfectly calm. Jamal had just nailed the final plank into his own coffin. He had publicly, eagerly rejected his right to my company, right in front of the judge, minutes before the final hammer was scheduled to fall. The judge made a swift note on her ledger. "Very well. The court recognizes the enforced post-nuptial agreement. Mr. Jamal is legally and permanently severed from all corporate entities owned by the plaintiff." She set her pen down and folded her hands on top of the heavy case file. "Now, before I sign the final order regarding the remaining marital assets and address the defense's request for alimony, Does the plaintiff have any final exhibits regarding the valuation of the business entities on record? This was the moment. The exact moment 10 years of condescension, mockery, and financial abuse came to a grinding, spectacular halt. Elias stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He did not look at Jamal. He did not look at the gallery where Chloe and Vivian were sitting. He looked directly at the judge with a calm, predatory confidence. "Yes, Your Honor." Elias said, his voice smooth and carrying perfectly across the silent courtroom. "We have one final document, Exhibit D." Elias stepped out from behind our table with a calm, measured grace. He did not rush. He did not look back at me for reassurance. He simply unclasped his leather briefcase, reached inside, and withdrew a thick, professionally bound stack of documents. The silence in the Fulton County courtroom was absolute. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic clicking of the air conditioning vent and the crisp rustle of high-quality paper as Elias walked directly toward the bench. He handed the primary folder up to the judge. Then, without breaking his stride, he pivoted and walked over to the defense table, placing an identical copy squarely in front of Jamal and his highly aggressive attorney. "Your Honor." Elias began, his voice projecting with a smooth, undeniable authority that commanded every single corner of the room. "The defense has spent the entirety of this proceeding, and indeed the entirety of this divorce, characterizing my client's business as a catastrophic liability. They have repeatedly, loudly, and under oath referred to Apex Medical Logistics as a sinking ship. They demanded an ironclad firewall to protect Mr. Jamal's corporate salary from what they assumed was a mountain of operational debt." The judge adjusted her reading glasses, her eyes scanning the first page of the document Elias had just handed her. She did not say a word, but I watched her posture shift. The subtle tightening of her grip on the paper told me she had just reached the bottom line. Elias turned on his heel, standing in the open space between the two legal tables. He looked directly at Jamal, who was staring down at the closed folder in front of him with a faint, confused scowl. "We felt it was our legal duty to provide the court with the most accurate, up-to-date valuation of this supposedly worthless entity." Elias continued, his tone dangerously polite. "What you are looking at is the final, fully executed acquisition agreement between Apex Medical Logistics and Horizon Health. This merger was officially finalized, and the funds were cleared exactly 72 hours ago." Jamal's lawyer practically ripped the folder open. His eyes darted violently across the dense legal text, frantically searching for the specific numerical valuation. I watched the exact moment he found it. The lawyer physically recoiled, his shoulders hitting the back of his chair as all the blood violently drained from his face. He looked as though he had just been struck by lightning. "For the official court record," Elias announced, making sure his voice rang loud and clear for the court reporter. "My client did not just sell a fleet of delivery trucks. She sold a proprietary state-of-the-art medical supply network. Horizon Health acquired Apex Medical Logistics for a total buyout sum of $45 million. The courtroom stopped breathing. The silence that followed that number was not just quiet. It was a heavy, suffocating vacuum. It was the sound of reality completely shattering. A heavy silver fountain pen slipped from Jamal's fingers. It hit the mahogany table with a sharp, echoing clack and rolled slowly off the edge, clattering onto the floor. Jamal did not move to pick it up. He did not blink. He stared blindly straight ahead, his brain utterly incapable of processing the words that had just left Elias's mouth. $45 million. In the gallery behind him, Vivian let out a loud, audible gasp, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. The immaculate ivory suit she was wearing suddenly looked incredibly cheap in the heavy shadow of generational wealth. Beside her, Chloe sat completely frozen. The smug, condescending sneer she had worn all morning was entirely gone, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure, unadulterated shock. All her vicious little comments about my rented clothes and my blue-collar background died right there in her throat. Terrence actually gripped the wooden back of the pew in front of him, his knuckles turning white as he stared at his younger brother. And Jasmine, the 24-year-old subordinate who thought she had secured a wealthy corporate prize, looked at Jamal with a dawning realization that she had just tied herself to a man who had fumbled the biggest financial bag in the history of Atlanta. Jamal's lawyer was sweating. He was frantically flipping through the acquisition papers, desperately scanning the clauses, the signatures, and the banking confirmations. He was looking for a loophole, a contingency, any tiny shred of legal ambiguity he could cling to. But Elias was a master of his craft. The paperwork was flawless. The money was real, it was secured, and it was sitting in a protected corporate holding account. Jamal's brain finally caught up to his reality. The absolute staggering magnitude of his mistake crashed down on him all at once. The polished, arrogant corporate director vanished in a millisecond, replaced by a desperate, greedy man watching an empire slip through his fingers. He jumped up from his chair. The sudden violent movement knocked his heavy leather seat backward, sending it crashing into the wooden railing behind him. "That is marital property!" Jamal shouted, his voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered panic. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me. "I am her husband. We have been married for 10 years. Half of that money is mine." His lawyer grabbed him by the sleeve of his suit jacket, trying to pull him back down to his seat, hissing at him to stay quiet. But Jamal was completely unhinged. The illusion of his superiority was gone, replaced by a frantic, clawing desperation. "I paid the bills!" Jamal yelled, ignoring his lawyer and turning his desperate gaze up to the judge. "I kept a roof over our heads while she was building that company. I funded her life. I subsidized her. I am legally entitled to 50% of that payout. You have to split that asset. It is 50-50. That is the law." The judge did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply reached out, picked up her heavy wooden gavel, and struck it against the sound block with a fierce cracking bang that silenced the entire room instantly. "Mr. Jamal, you will control yourself in my courtroom, or I will have the bailiff remove you in handcuffs," the judge commanded, her voice slicing through his panic like a steel blade. "Sit down immediately." Jamal collapsed back into his chair, his chest heaving, his eyes wide and wild. He looked at me across the aisle, his expression begging for a lifeline, searching for the submissive, quiet wife he thought he had controlled for a decade. I simply sat there in my bespoke plum suit, my hands folded neatly on the table, looking back at him with absolute freezing indifference. The judge picked up a different document from her heavy case file. It was not the acquisition papers Elias had just handed her. It was the sworn affidavit Jamal had eagerly signed during the preliminary hearing. She held it up so Jamal and his panicked attorney could see the signature on the bottom line. "You seem to be suffering from a severe case of selective memory," the judge stated, her tone dripping with judicial disdain. "You do not get to rewrite legal history simply because the math suddenly changed in your favor." She adjusted her glasses and looked directly down at Jamal. "You stood in this very courtroom and loudly declared that your wife's business was a massive liability. You testified under penalty of perjury that you viewed her life's work as a sinking ship. You demanded that this court enforce a post-nuptial agreement that you yourself initiated specifically to sever your corporate assets from her entrepreneurial efforts." "But I did not know," Jamal stammered, his polished vocabulary abandoning him entirely. "I did not know she was hiding a $45 million buyout. She deceived me. She did not deceive you." The judge fired back, her voice raising a fraction. "You deceived yourself with your own arrogance. You actively and maliciously attempted to financially isolate your wife because you believed she was beneath you. You demanded a legal firewall to protect your own pockets." The judge leaned forward, clasping her hands over the affidavit. "Well, Mr. Jamal, you successfully built your firewall. You legally distanced yourself from her liabilities. You locked the door from the outside, and you threw away the key." The absolute finality of her words hung in the air. Jamal's lawyer dropped his head into his hands, rubbing his temples in complete defeat. He knew there was no coming back from this. He had pushed for the enforcement of the post-nuptial agreement just as hard as Jamal had. They had dug their own graves with reckless enthusiasm. "You cannot have it both ways," the judge continued, her voice brutally clinical. "You cannot actively disclaim an asset when you think it holds debt only to demand 50% of it when it yields a fortune. The court has already recognized and enforced the post-nuptial agreement per your aggressive requests." She picked up her pen, hovering it over the final asset distribution order. "The acquisition funds belonging to Apex Medical Logistics are protected under the established corporate structure of the plaintiff. You, Mr. Jamal, are entitled to exactly 0% of this sale." Jamal let out a ragged, choking breath. He stared at the judge, his eyes bloodshot, his mouth opening and closing in silent, devastated horror. The $45 million he had just demanded a piece of was officially permanently gone. He had walked into the courthouse expecting to financially ruin a struggling delivery driver, only to realize he had legally barred himself from generational wealth. I was broken. He was completely, utterly defeated. But the absolute best part was that Elias and I were not even finished with him yet. The judge had just slammed the door on his chance at my fortune, but she was about to open the floor to the hidden Cayman Islands accounts, and Jamal had no idea that his nightmare was only just beginning. The devastating reality of the judge, locking him out of a $45 million fortune, had barely finished echoing off the wood-paneled walls of the courtroom. Jamal was hyperventilating, his hands gripping the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles were stark white. He looked like a man who had just been thrown out of an airplane without a parachute, watching the ground rush up to meet him at terrifying speed. His cutthroat lawyer had completely abandoned him, physically leaning away from Jamal and staring down at his legal pad in absolute defeat. But Elias and I were not finished. While Jamal was struggling to draw breath into his lungs, Elias remained standing in the center of the courtroom. He buttoned his suit jacket, his posture radiating a calm, lethal professionalism. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court," Elias said, his voice cutting through the heavy, suffocated silence of the room. "There is one final matter regarding the division of assets that requires your immediate attention before the final decree is stamped." The judge looked up from the acquisition papers, her expression sharp and attentive. "Proceed, Mr. Elias." Elias walked back to our table, picked up the thin manila folder he had teased during the deposition, and carried it straight to the bench. He handed a copy to the judge, and then walked over to the defense table, dropping a second copy right on top of Jamal's folded hands. During the discovery phase of this divorce, Elias explained, pacing slowly back to the center of the room, "The defense was incredibly aggressive in demanding my client's personal banking records. However, while they were reviewing her modest personal checking account, we initiated a forensic audit of Mr. Jamal's corporate income and bonus structures over the past 36 months. Jamal stared down at the manila folder. He did not open it. He knew exactly what was inside, and the last remaining drop of color completely vanished from his face. In the documents provided to the court, Elias continued, projecting his voice so everyone in the gallery could hear every single word. "You will find a certified subpoenaed record of international wire transfers. Over the last 4 years, Mr. Jamal has been systematically siphoning his corporate bonuses away from the marital estate. He funneled these marital funds through a shell company registered in Delaware and then wired them directly into a private, offshore investment account located in the Cayman Islands." A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the gallery behind us. I could hear Vivian shifting uncomfortably in her seat, the crisp rustle of her ivory suit betraying her sudden panic. "The current balance of that hidden offshore account is exactly $212,000, Elias stated, letting the number ring out. "Furthermore, Your Honor, the forensic audit reveals that Mr. Jamal has spent an additional $40,000 in marital funds over the last year alone to finance luxury vacations, designer goods, and upscale apartment rent for his 24-year-old subordinate Jasmine, who is currently seated in the gallery." All heads in the courtroom immediately snapped toward the gallery benches. Jasmine shrank back into the wooden pew, her eyes wide with sudden terrifying exposure. Chloe, sitting right next to her, actually scooted an inch away as if financial fraud were contagious. Elias stepped right up to the defense table and looked directly at Jamal's lawyer. "Yesterday morning, Mr. Jamal submitted a sworn financial affidavit to this court, claiming severe financial distress and demanding alimony from my client. He swore under penalty of perjury that he had fully disclosed all of his assets. He deliberately hid $250,000 from this court, while attempting to extract money from a woman he believed was struggling to survive." The judge slowly lowered the offshore banking documents. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated judicial fury. Judges in family court handle bitter disputes every single day, but the one thing they absolutely will not tolerate is a blatant, arrogant attempt to make a fool out of their courtroom. She turned her blistering gaze directly onto Jamal's lawyer. "Counsel, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. Did you have any knowledge of these offshore accounts when you filed your client's sworn financial disclosure yesterday? Jamal's lawyer jumped out of his chair as if the seat had suddenly caught fire. He threw his hands up in a gesture of absolute surrender, eager to save his own law license from the burning wreckage of his client's ego. Absolutely not, Your Honor, the lawyer practically shouted, throwing Jamal completely under the bus. I relied on the financial records my client provided to me. I had zero knowledge of any international accounts or shell companies. The judge slowly turned her attention to Jamal. He was shrinking into his heavy leather chair, looking like a terrified little boy who had just been caught stealing from the collection plate. Mr. Jamal, the judge, began, her voice echoing with righteous anger. You walked into my courtroom today, demanding a limine. You painted yourself as a financial victim. You attempted to use the legal system to bully and bankrupt your wife, all while sitting on hundreds of thousands of dollars in hidden international assets. You committed blatant perjury on a sworn court document. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, to offer some pathetic, polished corporate excuse, but the judge slammed her hand flat against the bench, silencing him instantly. Do not speak, the judge commanded. You have done quite enough talking for one lifetime. She picked up her pen and pulled the final divorce decree toward her. This court does not reward perjury, and it certainly does not reward financial abuse, the judge stated, her pen moving swiftly across the thick paper. Your request for transitional alimony is denied in its entirety. Your request for sole possession of the joint savings is denied. She flipped to the next page of the order, her voice cold and absolute. Furthermore, because you actively attempted to defraud this court and conceal marital assets, I am utilizing my full punitive authority under Georgia law. The entirety of the $212,000 Cayman Islands investment account is hereby awarded to the plaintiff, Miss Maya. Jamal let out a pathetic, strangled gasp. He reached his hands up and grabbed his own hair, his elbows resting on the table as his entire financial foundation collapsed. But the judge was not finished dismantling him. Additionally, the judge continued, not missing a single beat. You are hereby ordered to reimburse the marital estate for the $40,000 you illicitly squandered on your extramarital affair. That entire sum will be paid directly to the plaintiff. And because your fraudulent actions necessitated the hiring of forensic accountants and extended litigation, you are ordered to pay 100% of the plaintiff's legal fees due within 30 days. I did the math in my head, sitting perfectly still at the plaintiff's table. Jamal had walked into the courthouse, expecting to walk away with millions of dollars from my business, a healthy alimony check, and his secret offshore stash intact. Instead, he was walking out with absolutely nothing. He had lost the offshore account. He owed me $40,000 in reimbursement. He owed Elias a premium top-tier legal retainer fee, and he still had his own cutthroat lawyer to pay. Jamal was not just broke. He was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. He was mathematically, comprehensively ruined. The absolute devastation of that reality settled over the courtroom like a thick fog. Jamal was staring at the table, his chest heaving, completely broken by his own spectacular arrogance. And then the final beautiful twist of the knife came from the gallery behind us. Jasmine had been sitting in the wooden pew, listening to the judge read out the brutal financial penalties. She was a junior financial analyst. She knew exactly how to do the math, and she had just realized that her wealthy, sophisticated corporate sugar daddy was now a massive walking liability. He had no offshore money. He was buried in debt, and his corporate reputation was about to go up in flames the second this perjury hit the public record. Suddenly, the heavy wooden bench scraped loudly against the marble floor as Jasmine stood up. She did not care about courtroom decorum. She did not care about the armed bailiff standing by the door. You lied to me! Jasmine shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet professionalism of the courtroom. You told me she was the broke one. You told me we were going to buy a house in Buckhead. You are completely broke. The judge banged her gavel, demanding order, but Jasmine was entirely unhinged. She reached down, grabbed her expensive designer purse, and marched right up to the wooden railing separating the gallery from the legal tables. Jamal spun around in his chair, looking up at his mistress with wide, desperate eyes. Jasmine, baby, please wait. We can fix this. Fix this! Jasmine screamed, her face flushed with fury. You are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I am not ruining my credit score for you. She reached for her left hand and violently yanked off the large diamond promise ring Jamal had bought her with my money. She threw the ring directly at his chest. The heavy piece of jewelry hit his expensive charcoal suit jacket and clattered loudly onto the polished mahogany table, rolling right over the top of the Cayman Islands banking documents. Have fun paying off your lawyer, you fraud, Jasmine yelled. She turned on her heel and stormed down the center aisle of the courtroom. The heavy double wooden doors slammed shut behind her, the echoing thud serving as the absolute perfect punctuation mark to the end of Jamal's entire world. The sound of those heavy double wooden doors slamming shut behind Jasmine was the absolute perfect ending to the courtroom spectacle. The judge gave Jamal one final look of profound disgust before declaring the proceedings officially adjourned. I calmly gathered my purse, smoothed down the lapels of my tailored plum suit, and walked out into the wide marble hallway of the Fulton County Courthouse with Elias right beside me. We had not just won a legal battle. We had executed a flawless, comprehensive demolition of a man who thought he could use the justice system to bury me alive. I barely had time to take a full breath of the cool, conditioned hallway air before I heard the frantic, echoing click of heels rushing across the marble floor. Vivian and Chloe were practically tripping over themselves to reach me. The arrogant, condescending women who had spent the last 10 years treating me like a disease were suddenly looking at me with wide, desperate eyes. The transformation was actually pathetic to witness. Their golden boy had just been stripped of everything, and they had just realized that the woman they had relentlessly mocked was holding the keys to a $45 million empire. Chloe reached me first. Her face was flushed, and her voice trembled with a sickeningly sweet manufactured warmth that made my skin crawl. Maya, she gasped, reaching her arms out, as if she were going to pull me into a deep, loving embrace. Oh my goodness, sister. We had absolutely no idea. We are so incredibly sorry about all of that horrible misunderstanding in there. Jamal completely kept us in the dark. I took a deliberate step back. The movement was so sharp, so freezing cold, that Chloe's arms dropped awkwardly to her sides. She stood there, her mouth hanging slightly open, realizing her performance was not working. Do not call me sister, I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register that stopped Vivian dead in her tracks. Vivian stepped forward anyway, wringing her hands together, her immaculate ivory suit suddenly looking deeply uncomfortable on her. Maya, please, you have to understand. Jamal misled us. He told us your business was failing. He told us you were struggling to survive. We were just trying to support our son. You are family. We always knew you were a brilliant, capable woman. We are so proud of you. I looked at Vivian, taking in the sheer, unadulterated desperation sweating through her expensive makeup. You thought I was living in a cheap roadside motel, Vivian. You spent the last month telling your entire country club and every woman at your church that I was a destitute parasite who drained your son of his resources. You celebrated my supposed downfall. I shifted my gaze back to my white sister-in-law, who was now visibly shaking. And Chloe, you brought me your discarded, scuffed purses because you thought I needed your sloppy charity to get a warehouse job. You posted on the internet about deadbeat wives holding successful men back. You called his 24-year-old mistress a massive upgrade right in front of my face in the mediation lobby. Chloe opened her mouth to speak, her face turning a deep, blotchy red, but no words came out. The shame was finally choking her. I do not want your frantic apologies. I continued looking at both of them with total, unshakable indifference. I do not want your fake affection now that you know my actual net worth. You wanted me out of your golden family, and you got your exact wish. Hear me clearly right now. You, Jamal, and Terrence will never see a single dime of my money. Go home and figure out how your genius corporate boy is going to pay off his massive mountain of debt, because he has absolutely nothing left to his name. I turned my back on them and walked down the expansive hallway with Elias. I did not look back, but I could feel them standing there in stunned, paralyzed silence as the crushing reality of their lost access to generational wealth finally crashed down on their heads. Within weeks, Jamal's carefully constructed life collapsed. His firm fired him after learning about the hidden offshore account and his sworn false disclosures. The IRS opened an investigation, his legal debts consumed what remained of his savings, and Apex formally removed him from the corporate condo. Jasmine disappeared as soon as his accounts were frozen, while the family members who had encouraged his cruelty refused to help him. 6 months passed with the swift, beautiful momentum of a life finally unburdened. Spring arrived in Atlanta, painting the city in vibrant shades of green and gold, a perfect reflection of the absolute renaissance taking place in my own world. I was no longer the exhausted woman running a logistics fleet from a modest kitchen table, desperately trying to shrink myself to appease a man who despised my ambition. I was thriving. I sat firmly on the executive board of Horizon Health, occupying a high-backed leather chair in a glass-walled boardroom that overlooked the very hospital networks my transport routes now seamlessly supplied. My days were filled with high-level strategy meetings, multi-million-dollar infrastructure negotiations, and directing the expansion of our medical logistics framework across the entire East Coast. But the wealth and the corporate power were only a fraction of my newfound peace. The true joy came from what I was able to build outside of the boardroom. Using a portion of my acquisition funds, I established a philanthropic incubator specifically designed for young Black female entrepreneurs in Atlanta. I created a foundation that provided substantial, no-strings-attached capital and intensive mentorship to women who were building businesses with their own two hands. I sought out the women who had dirt on their boots and fire in their hearts, the women who were constantly told by society, and sometimes by their own families, that their dreams were embarrassing or too small. I gave them the financial backing and the corporate respect I had been starved of for a decade. My life was peaceful, completely secure, and entirely free of the toxic heavy weight I had carried for so long. On a crisp Tuesday evening, I wrapped up a late board meeting and walked out through the soaring glass revolving doors of the Horizon Health corporate headquarters. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm, brilliant orange glow over the downtown skyline. My private driver was idling by the curb in a sleek black town car, waiting to take me back to the sprawling, quiet estate I had recently purchased in Buckhead. I took a deep breath of the fresh evening air, feeling the familiar, deep-seated satisfaction of a hard day of meaningful work. But as I stepped off the marble plaza and onto the wide concrete sidewalk, a figure separated itself from the shadows near the visitor parking garage. "Maya, please wait." I stopped. I recognized the voice immediately, but the man standing a few feet away from me was almost unrecognizable. It was Jamal, the immaculate, arrogant corporate king who used to spend thousands of dollars on custom-tailored suits and luxury watches was completely gone. The man standing before me looked deeply disheveled, hollowed out, and entirely desperate. I was wearing a rumpled, ill-fitting dress shirt that had seen better days. His shoulders, which he used to puff out with such intense manufactured superiority, were slumped heavily forward. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of months of sleepless nights, relentless anxiety, and the crushing, suffocating weight of total financial ruin. He took a hesitant step forward, holding his hands up slightly, as if to show he meant no harm. The private security guard stationed near the building entrance noticed the interaction and immediately stepped forward, placing a hand on his radio. I raised my hand just a fraction, signaling to the guard that I was fine but asking him to stand by. I was not afraid of Jamal anymore. He had absolutely zero power left in my world. "Maya, you look incredible," Jamal said, his voice cracking with a pathetic manufactured vulnerability. "I know I am the last person you want to see right now, but I have been waiting out here for hours. I just needed to talk to you. I needed to see you." I did not cross my arms. I did not glare at him. I simply stood there, my bespoke designer tote bag resting lightly on my forearm, and observed the man who used to terrorize my peace. I looked at him with the exact same clinical, unbothered detachment one might use to inspect a dented bumper in a parking lot. "I lost everything." Maya, Jamal continued, his voice trembling as tears actually began to pool in his eyes. "The firm fired me. The IRS audited me and took whatever tiny fraction of money I had left to cover the international tax evasion penalties. Jasmine left me the second my bank accounts were frozen. Terrence and Chloe will not even answer my phone calls anymore. I am living in a tiny, miserable weekly rental on the absolute edge of the city. I have absolutely nothing. I remained completely silent, letting him drown in the pathetic reality of his own making. He was looking at me with wide, begging eyes, desperately hoping to find a shred of the forgiving, accommodating wife he had spent 10 years walking all over. I was so blind, he pleaded, taking a small, shuffling step closer. I was intimidated by your drive. I let my ego and my family's toxic expectations ruin the best thing that ever happened to me. I made a catastrophic mistake, Maya. I am a broken man, but I am changing. I am going to therapy. I am trying to rebuild. I just need a second chance. I need you to know that deep down, beneath all the posturing and the lies, I always believed in you. I always knew you were destined for greatness. Please. Maya, just give me 5 minutes to prove I can be the man you actually deserve. The sheer monumental audacity of his words hung in the crisp evening air. He did not believe in me. He had literally laughed in my face, handed me a $10,000 debit card, and told me to get out of his house. He had brought his family to a steakhouse to watch him throw me away like garbage. And now, standing on the sidewalk in his rumpled clothes, he was attempting to rewrite history just to secure a lifeline to my wealth. I did not yell at him. I did not seek vengeance. I did not waste my breath detailing the poetry of his downfall or expressing any satisfaction in his ruin. He was not worth the expenditure of my energy. I simply maintained steady, unwavering eye contact as I reached into my designer purse. I opened my wallet, my fingers brushing past thick black corporate cards, and deliberately pulled out a single crisp paper bill. I held the money out toward him. Jamal stared at my hand, his tear-filled eyes blinking in profound, desperate confusion. He looked at the denomination printed on the crisp green paper. It was a $10 bill. I stepped forward and pressed the bill flat against his chest right over his heart, forcing him to reach up and take it. Try planning better next time, Jamal. I said, my voice soft, smooth, and utterly final. I did not wait to watch his reaction. I did not stick around to see the realization of my ultimate dismissal break him all over again. I simply turned my back on him, the heels of my designer shoes clicking a steady, powerful rhythm against the pavement. The security guard opened the heavy rear door of the waiting town car. I slid into the plush leather interior, the rich scent of the pristine upholstery wrapping around me. The heavy door shut with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing me inside my private, secure world. As the car pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the vibrant flow of downtown traffic, I did not look back at the sidewalk. Instead, I looked out the tinted window at the towering, glittering skyline of Atlanta, rising up against the darkening sky. The city lights were just beginning to flicker on, illuminating the sprawling network of roads and hospitals that I had conquered with my own two hands. I leaned back against the comfortable leather seat and let out a slow, deeply contented breath. I reflected on the long, grueling journey of the past decade. The early mornings, the calloused hands, the relentless criticism, and the final brutal betrayal that was meant to destroy me. I realized in that quiet moment that I no longer needed to shrink myself to fit into anyone else's shadow. I had survived a family that demanded my submission and a husband who demanded my failure. I took the ultimate slap in the face, the most humiliating public rejection imaginable, and I used it as the very foundation to build an empire. The war was officially over and the rest of my life was entirely beautifully mine. The most powerful lesson from Maya's story is that a person's true value is not determined by appearances, titles, income statements, or the opinions of arrogant people. For years, Jamal and his family looked down on Maya because they believed she was only a struggling delivery driver. They saw her modest clothes, old car, and quiet personality as signs of failure. What they failed to understand was that Maya's silence was not weakness. It was discipline, patience, and confidence. Maya did not waste her energy trying to convince people who had already chosen to underestimate her. Instead of arguing with Jamal every time he insulted her business, she continued working. She built her company one vehicle, one contract, and one sleepless night at a time. Her success did not happen overnight. It came from sacrifice, persistence, and the courage to believe in her vision, when no one else did. This teaches us that we should never allow other people's limited understanding to define our future. Sometimes the people closest to us will not recognize our potential. They may criticize our dreams because they cannot see the work happening behind the scenes. They may judge us according to our current circumstances rather than the destination toward which we are moving. However, their inability to see our value does not make us less valuable. The story also teaches an important lesson about pride. Jamal believed his corporate position made him smarter and more successful than Maya. His arrogance prevented him from asking questions, reading legal documents carefully, or respecting the woman who had supported him for 10 years. He was so determined to prove that Maya was worthless that he repeatedly signed away his rights to her company. In trying to protect himself from her imagined failure, he separated himself from her very real success. Pride often makes people careless. When someone believes they are always the smartest person in the room, they stop listening and learning. Jamal's downfall was not caused by Maya's revenge alone. It was caused by his dishonesty, selfishness, and refusal to accept that he might have been wrong. Every cruel decision he made eventually became evidence against him. Maya's response is equally important. She did not destroy Jamal through violence, public arguments, or emotional outbursts. She allowed the truth and the consequences of his own choices to expose him. Her calmness protected her dignity and gave her the clarity to act wisely. She understood that not every insult requires an immediate response. Sometimes the strongest answer is to remain focused, prepare carefully, and let the results speak for themselves. Finally, Maya's story reminds us that success should never be used to seek validation from people who treated us badly. After becoming wealthy and free, she did not return to Jamal because he apologized. She recognized that his regret appeared only after he lost access to her success. She chose self-respect over familiarity. We should forgive ourselves for staying too long in places where we were undervalued, but we should also have the courage to leave when respect disappears. Real love does not humiliate, control, or belittle. The right people will not require us to hide our strength to protect their ego. Maya's greatest victory was not the $45 million. Her greatest victory was realizing that she no longer needed the approval of anyone who had mistaken her patience for weakness. True freedom begins when we understand our worth and refuse to let anyone bargain it away. If Maya's journey inspired you to recognize your own worth, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below.